It's common when women describe certain body parts of men. Good evening, fellow Toastmasters and guests. Thank you again for giving me this opportunity. FnK for doing another workshop on the Better Speaker series. It's a mouthful, tongue twister as well, right? Before I get to the content, I would like to run you through the table of content so that we know exactly what we'll be talking about today. This workshop will be broken down into three main sections. The first one would be, why do we use body language? Like, what's the importance of body language? Why do we even care, right? Followed by three categories of body language, or rather three types of body language that we could use in our speech. I have to make sure I'm using the body language well, that it's not cut away by the screen because I'm actually presenting body language now. It would be super ironic. And then the final section of the speech would be, how do we effectively use body language? Firstly, why body language? Why care? Does anyone care to unmute and try and respond? Yes, that would be a super literal and clear answer, and that is also very important. Thank you for pointing that out. To perform, or rather make our speech content more visual. Before I go on, can you imagine a world without body language? I know that there are people who are born without limbs in the world, but they also use body language. If you guys know of the motivational speaker Nick Vujicic, he's born without limbs. But hey, even when he speaks, he moves his shoulders to make his point. But can you first imagine that we are all made up of only heads, right? And we don't have any eyes. And all we do to present our information is speak. How would that be like? That would be very difficult for us to really communicate with each other, right? Like people who have wives, I've heard that sometimes without speaking, if their wife points at them or glare at them, they will know what their wife is suggesting. But oh my gosh, if we do not have that ability to convey body language, can you imagine how many arguments, how many couples would be in? And that, I guess, just shows the importance of body language. Some other points that refer to the importance of body language include, first, emotional expressions. Some spoilers here, Kiwi did a great job at conveying his emotional expressions during his speech, and we'll talk about that later. Second, for emphasis, like if your wife is very angry with you and she does not want to speak with you, her frown would accentuate the anger that she's feeling. And if you have some form of emotional intelligence, you should detect that, otherwise you're going to be in a lot of trouble, right? Third, like I mentioned, visualization, to let the audience not only listen to you, but also see you so that they can conceptualize the content that you're trying to present. And all these points actually come down to one very important point in terms of speech delivery, which is to create an impact so that the audience will remember you. This is very important. In regular meetings, we want the audience to remember us to make sure that we didn't waste our time creating content, right? And also, of course, they would learn. In contests, this is a strategy. My mentor taught me this. She's no longer in this club, so I will share with you a secret. She said, make your speech as memorable as possible so that the audience will focus on you and they will not focus on the next speaker. That is if you're the first speaker, right? So some contest tips for you to think about. Let's get into the second point of our workshop. The three categories of body language. I'll run through them bit by bit. Firstly, it's emotional expressions. That's the first type. Second would be gestures, use of hand gestures for the most part, at least in online delivery. And thirdly, whole body movement. Right, let's look at facial expressions first. What do you think is the importance of facial expression? Kiwi, since I mentioned that you did well in your speech in terms of facial expressions, I'm not sure if you intentionally did it, but would you want to share why you think facial expressions are important during speech?
Thanks for the perfect timing. I'm just having my dinner, but I think I can try.
Apologies.
Yeah, so I think facial expression, oh, that's my wife, by the way. So I think facial expression is extremely important. So when you're happy, you're like, yay! And when you're sad, like, so it creates that engagement with the audience that they can feel your emotions, and that's very important, especially when we are virtual and people cannot actually see us physically. So remember, I did it intentionally. When I say I'm confused, I'm like, what do you mean by that? So my face actually, I don't have to say anything, just by looking at my facial expression like this, like, what do you mean? You can actually already feel that I'm confused. So I don't have to use the words to express, but my face actually shows you that I'm already confused. So that's the power of facial expression, and I think that's also why if more people can incorporate this kind of facial expression in their speech, it will actually bring that speech to higher engagement and also engaging with the audience better.
For sure, that is a very thorough answer. From what I can grasp, firstly, to engage with the audience so that they can not only understand what you're saying, but they also feel what you're trying to say. And that is really good with speech delivery as well, right? Like mentioned in the beginning, it's a key to the meaning behind a message. But if we think about it to a next level, what does this mean? Right? For the most part, facial expressions are encapsulated in our eye contact. Right? Other than how we frown, it's about how we look at the audience. Then a lot of time evaluators will say, oh, eye contact, eye contact, eye contact. Actually, what is the importance of eye contact? Does it just mean looking at the audience? Would looking at the audience be enough to convey the emotions that you're trying to present? Look at this photo. I think at first sight, we understand the type of emotional expression that Home Alone kid is trying to convey. Surprise, fear, shock. And then this one. I guess we see more of this in stand-up comedies, where the person goes, oh well, a lot of things are going on, but I don't really care. That shows a nonchalant type of facial expression. And if you can incorporate that even in a serious speech, I think that contrast between having seriousness and some relaxation and nonchalance would be super great. Followed by that, the serious face. When you're trying to present something that is climactic, right? Usually when you come to the climax of the story, at the end of the day, she broke up with me. Right? You need to know when to use the correct facial expressions as well. You can't be like, oh well, she broke up with me, but I don't care. Well, sometimes you can be like that, depends on who the girl or the guy is lah. And if you're trying to be a leader and motivate the team, can you be like, okay team, let's work on this today? That does not really work. But if you're like, okay team, let's work on this today, then the effect created is very different. And all in all, with the appropriate use of facial expressions, we know the importance. The audience will be in awe, like in awe and literally in awe as well, like this meme. We'll come to the second aspect of facial expressions then. I mean, emotional expression, what's that called? The second aspect of gestures. No, yeah, the second aspect of body language, I'm so sorry. Gestures. Well, when we look at gestures, hand gestures, I think in the Toastmaster handbooks, at least in the old one, it always emphasizes hand gestures. But what do we mean by hand gestures? If you want to break it down into more detailed parts, there are actually three types of hand gestures that we can make use of in our speeches. There's the conventional hand gestures, there's the descriptive hand gestures, and there is the emotional hand gestures. Of course, I won't bombard you with jargons and not explain. So let's get into what conventional hand gestures are. Conventional hand gestures, I think, would not need a lot of explanation. It's basically the natural hand gestures that you would use when you're speaking. Let's not even think about a speech, right? Think about the time where you're on the phone call. And sometimes when you're speaking to someone, you're kind of like, yeah, boss, I know what the next step is, but I don't really understand what you're trying to say because I finished my task. Notice this hand. I'm doing this. When you're delivering a standard presentation or you're just communicating with someone, the use of hand gestures sometimes aids the point that you're trying to make. Notice my hand gestures. These are not planned out. I did not plan out like, okay, at this time, when I said this word, I'm gonna use these hand gestures. These come very naturally. These are conventional hand gestures. The second type of hand gesture would be more intentional. It's called the descriptive hand gestures. If you notice Kiwi's speech in the beginning, he said, I don't know the value of having a mentor. I never had a mentor. Intentional or not, it creates a listing effect. It runs your audience through what you're trying to say. Another example of descriptive hand gestures, I think, is common when women describe certain body parts of men. It's this big, or this small, or this long, however you want to interpret it. So that again creates a sort of visualization of the content you're trying to present. Your hand gestures is going to aid your speech delivery, especially if the content is very complicated. Lastly, we have emotional gestures. This one I briefly went through when I was talking about emotional expressions. It's the type of gestures that you deliver when you're trying to convey a certain form of emotion. Let's look at motivational types. Look at the stance that she has. We have to do it, team. Let's make America great again, like a politician would mention. Of course, does it mean that you need to be more elaborate when you're emotional? Does not mean that. Sometimes when you're not doing anything, it might have a greater effect as well, especially when the emotion that you're trying to convey is something that's depressing, right? Sometimes just standing and looking at the audience blankly perhaps would create a better effect. I'll leave that to interpretation. Everyone has a different style. Let's now look at the third category of body language, whole body movement. Well, I would be able to demonstrate more if we were in a in-person meeting, but I'll do my best as well in the online delivery. Firstly, whole body, of course, in this case, it's the upper body in online delivery for the most part. Your stance is very important. Whether or not it's online or in person, stance is very, very important. On the Toastmasters slide, the original slide, it says to be relaxed and balanced. And I completely agree with that. Just I think that it's not super complete because there's something missing. Other than being relaxed and balanced, well, not stiff, right? Relaxed and balanced, you also want to display confidence during that process of being relaxed and balanced. Well, if you watch a speaker and he sort of, wavers around like that, especially if it's informative, right? According to research, there seems to be 5,566 cases of COVID cases today in Malaysia. You sort of lose confidence in that speaker because the wavering of the body makes the convincing effect of the speech less strong. So that's something to keep in mind. Another important aspect of whole body movement is when you talk about stories, varying your speaking positions. What do I mean by that? This would come back to the point of visualization. Imagine I'm trying to tell you what Kiwi's boss told me. Imagine I was Kiwi and I was telling the story about my boss having a conversation with me. If I say, my boss said this, she said, when will the task be done? What is the next task? And I said this. Perhaps I'm able to hear what you're saying. To some extent, I'm able to imagine what's going on in my mind. But what if you actually vary your speaking position? Let's try this. It'd be easier in in-person delivery, but let's try this. My boss said, when is the next task? When is the next task due? What is the next task? And I said, I'm not sure. I don't know what you mean. Right? In that case, the cognitive load of the audience will be decreased because they don't have to imagine what was happening. You are showing them what's happening in terms of body language and also in terms of content. So that's something interesting to consider. There's one speech, I think it was the world champion, the runner-up, back in 2004 or something when a lot of us were younger. The person, he was talking about his experience in different countries. He first talked about his experience in Australia. And then, when he talked about how he moved to China, he actually moved to the other end of the stage. And the stage was long, right? So he actually walked, like long, not like the previous meme that we saw. Long. So he actually walked from one end of the stage to the other. So that walking movement, that varying of positions, make the speakers kind of realize, at least subconsciously, that okay, when he's at this end of the stage, he's in Australia. When he's at that end of the stage, he's in China. Again, that can decrease the cognitive load because the audience won't have to think, okay, where is he now again? But when he stands in different areas, the audience automatically knows what he's talking about, where he's at. This adds to the context of the speech, which adds some flavor. Conversations, making a point, we discussed that. And, making a point, we skipped that. When you're trying to make a point, in my speeches, sometimes I step forward, right? So I'll be delivering my speech, and I say, but there's something really interesting about mental contrasting. If I was delivering that in-person impromptu speech, I would take a step forward or backward. In my experience, that's worked pretty well. And then you go on to talk about mental contrasting. That one step forward again creates that visualization that, okay, he's gonna move on to a new point now. And perhaps this is something that we have to remember more closely because he's taking a step forward. Emotional expressions as well. When you're trying to express an emotion, you can also move to various parts of the stage to show at this point on stage I'm sad, but when I move to the middle of the stage, perhaps I'm neutral, and then perhaps when I move to the end of the stage, I'm feeling over the moon. So we talked about 3 categories of body language. We talked about gestures, facial expressions, and whole body movements. And then we might think, which one is the most effective one? Is there the most superior one that I could always use in my speech to make my speeches better than they are? In my personal opinion, a mix of everything would be the best. Because a speech is not singular. It is holistic. A lot of things are going on, more complex than we think. At some points in the speech, maybe you have a story to tell. At some point, maybe you have a point to make. At some point, maybe you have something to describe. At some point, maybe you have something to list. So a mix of everything, where appropriate, I believe, would be the most effective body language. And then at this point, you might think, okay, Khian, now that I know about the most effective use of body language, how can I better incorporate these things in my speech? There's no shortcut other than practicing, in my opinion. Well, how can you practice? Personally, I practice by looking at myself in the mirror. This actually helps with COVID, loneliness. Well, if you feel lonely when you're isolated at home, try delivering speeches in front of the mirror. It actually, it's helped my well-being because I feel that I'm conversing with someone. To an outsider, it might seem like I'm crazy, but hey, I'm practicing my body language as well. Or you can record yourself. Or if you want to take it one step further, present to your family and friends, especially the ones who are very judgmental, because most of the time, while it might be hurtful to hear their feedback, they are the ones who might have nuggets of advice that might be helpful to you. Because the most judgmental ones are usually the ones, not all the time, but the ones who have actually thought through. That's why they form that judgment. If that person is always like, yeah, this is great, this is awesome, this is perfect, then I guess while it helps with your confidence, it does not help you to push to the next level. To conclude, I'd like to present this quote by a Russian actor. I hope I don't pronounce his name super badly. Konstantin Stanislavski. If anyone knows Russian, please do correct me. The language of the body is the key that can unlock the soul. And why is this person credible? He is presented in multiple drama plays in theaters. In theaters, you actually have to make use of body language because unlike modern movies with the sound effect or anything else that can aid the presentation. In theaters, it's only that guy. There's no sound effect. And this guy was in like the 1970s or 60s, if I'm not mistaken. So no technology at all to help him. So he is someone who actually knows what he's talking about. Before I end my workshop, I've actually got the permission of our president, who is not here today, to put in a shameless plug, right? If you're interested in more content on psychology, on public speaking, or anything in life or fitness as well, do check out my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is Chatty Khian. I present information mostly on psychology. I talk about public speaking as well. If you look at the second row from the left, the second video, that was the first workshop that I presented on knowing your audience. If you're interested in that, do take a look. And I will also censor all the names that I've mentioned and silent all the feedback from the audience I got today, so don't worry about privacy issues. And that is all from me today. Thank you very much. Back to you.